The Open Mind by J. Robert Oppenheimer. After science gives humanity unprecedented power, can scientific knowledge, open inquiry, international cooperation, and responsible public judgment prevent that power from becoming destructive?
That is the ultimate stress test of human institutions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a test we are still taking today. That's the question at the heart of our deep dive today. And to really explore how we handle irreversible technological breakthroughs, we need a roadmap. So, over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to trace the historical leap from the discovery of nuclear fission right through the massive logistical undertaking of the Manhattan Project and straight into the Cold War arms race. We'll explore the intense conflict between national secrecy and open scientific inquiry. We're going to tease out the agonizing dilemma of deterrence versus international control. Then, we'll look at the massive shift that happened when scientists suddenly had to act as political advisors.
Which is a huge shift.
Right. And that led directly to the controversies of loyalty, dissent, and that infamous 1954 security hearing. And finally, we promised to bring all of this directly to the year 2026, comparing those foundational nuclear risks to today's rapidly emerging threats like artificial intelligence and cyber warfare.
It is a massive, and I mean really critical, path we're walking today. And to do it justice, we first have to establish exactly what our source material is. We are looking at a volume published in 1955, and it's a collection of 8 specific lectures delivered between 1946 and 1954.
Okay, yeah.
Half of these lectures deal directly with atomic weapons and atomic energy policy. And then the other half, well, they place science within a much larger intellectual and cultural framework.
Right, before we get into the weeds, I want to explicitly correct a huge misconception about this book. Because people think, well, we all kind of absorbed this pop culture myth, right? People assume this book is a memoir, or, like a companion piece to a recent blockbuster film, or a complete chronological history of the Manhattan Project.
Which it absolutely is not.
Exactly. It is none of those things. It is a rigorous intellectual examination of atomic weapons, atomic energy, scientific knowledge, intellectual freedom, culture, and the overwhelming responsibilities created by sudden technological power. So we aren't doing a chapter-by-chapter summary today. We're not imitating anybody's speaking style. We are taking the core tensions presented in those lectures and pulling them apart.
Which brings us to the first major historical tension, right? The transition from theory to devastating reality. How did we cross the threshold into the atomic age, and who actually did the crossing?
Let's start with the who, because there's this romantic narrative we always fall back on, the lone genius.
Oh, right. The solitary scientist at the chalkboard.
Yeah. Furiously writing equations until they have your eureka moment, and boom, they've invented the future in their garage. But the reality of the atomic bomb completely shatters that myth. We have to explicitly correct this. Oppenheimer did not create the atomic bomb alone. It wasn't just one person.
The scale of it is almost incomprehensible, even when you look back at it today. We are talking about a mobilization of resources that rivaled the entire gross domestic product of some sovereign nations.
Secret cities.
Yeah.
They built literal secret cities that did not exist on any map.
Right. Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos.
You had supply chains spanning continents. You had tens of thousands of construction workers, machinists, mathematicians, and administrators. And a lot of them had no idea what the final product even was.
That's the logistical reality. It resulted from a vast scientific, industrial, military, logistical, and governmental enterprise involving hundreds of thousands of people and massive institutions. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rapid shift from a theoretical physics paper to a geopolitical weapon rewrote the rules of international relations overnight.
Exactly how fast was this timeline? Because the way the lectures describe it, it sounds like complete institutional whiplash.
Whiplash is probably the best word for it. The progression is terrifyingly compressed. You have the discovery of nuclear fission, the realization that splitting a heavy nucleus releases energy in late 1938.
And then almost immediately World War II breaks out.
Exactly. So that theoretical paper transforms into the Manhattan Project. By 1943, you have the massive laboratory at Los Alamos running, and by 1945, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki completely alter human history.
It went from an academic curiosity to a geopolitical wrecking ball in less than 7 years.
And following that, the United States suddenly possesses a temporary atomic monopoly, which of course immediately triggers the paranoia of the emerging Cold War, locking the globe into a subsequent terrifying nuclear arms race.
Which forces us to look at this crucial distinction that runs through all of these lectures, right? The difference between discovering physical knowledge and deciding how institutions use that knowledge. Let's unpack this. The physics of it, the fact that the chain reaction of splitting atoms releases a massive amount of energy, that's just a fact of nature. It's like gravity.
Yes, it is entirely neutral. Physical knowledge is just a reality of the natural world. But taking that natural phenomenon and deciding to engineer a weapon out of it, deciding to load it onto a bomber.
Choosing specific cities as targets.
Exactly. Those are not scientific inevitabilities. Those are human institutional choices.
Science can calculate the exact thermal radiation. It can tell you what the blast radius will be down to the meter. But the physics equation doesn't have a variable for morality. It cannot tell a government if dropping that bomb is legally, ethically, or strategically justified.
And that realization that they had uncovered a physical truth of the universe, but had no overarching political framework to govern it, terrified the governments involved. Because once the capability existed, the immediate instinct of the state was containment. They just wanted to hide it.
Which, I mean, makes perfect sense from a bureaucratic standpoint. The Manhattan Project thrives on unprecedented secrecy. So the natural political reflex in 1946 was, let's just keep the secret forever. Lock the physics in a vault and maintain our monopoly.
But does hiding science actually work? We need to be really careful here because it's tempting to say secrecy is always irrational. We must explicitly correct that misconception. Secrecy is neither always irrational nor sufficient for security.
So it's not totally crazy to try and keep a secret.
No, it's a very effective tactical tool in the short term. It can protect operational details like, the specific metallurgical techniques used to machine a plutonium core. It can delay adversaries, forcing them to spend years figuring out engineering workarounds.
So it buys you time.
It buys time, but it is never sufficient for long-term security. The fundamental flaw in the permanent secret strategy is that you cannot classify the universe.
I love that phrase. You can classify a blueprint, but you can't classify a proton.
Exactly. The atoms in a Soviet laboratory behaved exactly the same as the atoms in an American laboratory. Competent foreign scientists were looking at the exact same universe, applying the exact same universal laws of physics. The knowledge was inherently discoverable.
And trying to maintain that illusion of a permanent secret has to come with a massive cost. If you lock down your scientific institutions, you're essentially strangling them. Right.
The institutional cost is staggering. Total secrecy obstructs your ability to verify treaties. It complicates alliances. I mean, you can't share defensive strategies with your allies if you won't tell them how the weapons work. And most dangerously, it chokes off open scientific inquiry.
Which you need to spot your own mistakes.
Exactly. Science requires peer review. If you operate in total darkness, your errors go uncorrected until it's too late.
So if the secret was always going to leak, and other nations were inevitably going to figure out the physics, what was the alternative they were pushing for?
The alternative proposed by many of the scientists was the international control of atomic energy. The idea was to stop a global arms race before the concrete dried, before massive arsenals hardened into permanent fixtures.
When you say international control, that sounds great on paper. But I'm assuming it wasn't just a gentleman's agreement where everyone promises not to build the apocalypse machine.
Far from it. And we have to explicitly correct this misconception, too. International control requires verification and enforcement. It wasn't about drafting treaties of friendship or declaring moral wishes at the UN.
Right.
To actually control this dual-use technology where the same reactor that generates electricity can also breed plutonium for a bomb sovereign states would have to surrender a significant portion of their national sovereignty.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning they would have to submit to highly intrusive, unannounced international inspections of their most sensitive military and industrial facilities. An international body would literally have to manage all the uranium mines and enrichment plants on Earth.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that. Asking superpowers to open up their most secretive military labs to foreign inspectors right at the dawn of the Cold War, wasn't that incredibly naive?
It's a completely valid critique. And the failure of those early international control plans demonstrates a grim reality of statecraft. Without strategic trust, and without credible, enforceable rules against cheating, sovereign states will always default to self-preservation. When faced with the choice of giving up sovereignty for inspections or keeping their programs hidden, they chose sovereignty.
And because international control died on arrival, nations turned to the only other option they saw: building bigger, deadlier arsenals to terrify each other into standing down. Which brings us directly to the concept of deterrence.
Yes, deterrence became the psychological architecture of the entire Cold War. And we need to define it carefully. It is not a physical law. It is entirely a strategic psychological relationship based on communication and perception. The goal is to make the perceived cost of an attack so horrifyingly unacceptable that no rational leader would ever initiate one.
So it's basically taking two people into a room full of gasoline, handing them both matches, and hoping the sheer terror of burning alive keeps them from striking a light.
A grim analogy, but structurally accurate. However, for deterrence to work, you need survivable retaliatory forces.
Meaning, making sure that even if we get hit first by a surprise attack, we still have enough weapons hidden away to hit them back and destroy their country. You have to guarantee the retaliation.
Yes. And maintaining that guarantee is what drives strategic stability, but it also drives an endless arms race.
Which leads us to the Great Crisis of 1949 and the thermonuclear weapon controversy.
Right. 1949 is the year the window shatters. The U.S. assumed they had a monopoly that would last maybe a decade or more. But in August of 1949, the Soviet Union tests their first atomic bomb.
The monopoly is over.
Much faster than anyone in Washington anticipated. Instantly, there is panic and a massive political push for a crash program to develop the hydrogen bomb. We need to pause here and explain the difference. A hydrogen bomb is not just a bigger atomic bomb. An atomic bomb relies on fission-splitting heavy atoms. A hydrogen bomb relies on fusion-forcing light atoms together. The theoretical destructive yield of a fusion weapon is virtually limitless. It is a qualitative shift in destruction.
Moving from wiping out a city center to potentially wiping out an entire metropolitan region and poisoning the surrounding environment with fallout. And this is where the controversy explodes, because Oppenheimer, along with the General Advisory Committee, strongly opposed this immediate crash program for the hydrogen bomb.
Yes, and we must explicitly correct a major misconception here. Opposition to an immediate hydrogen bomb program was not necessarily absolute pacifism.
Right, people often paint this moment as this cinematic battle between a newly awakened pacifist conscience and hawkish militarism. Like he just suddenly decided weapons were bad.
Which is a profound oversimplification. If we look at the historical documents, the dispute was about technical feasibility at the time. The designs for the Super in 1949 were theoretical and highly problematic.
They weren't even sure the physics would actually work for a deliverable weapon yet.
Exactly. Second, there was a deep debate over military utility. The committee asked, do we actually need a weapon of this staggering, indiscriminate magnitude to deter the Soviets?
Right, because an expanded arsenal of smaller, tactical fission weapons might be vastly more effective for actual battlefield defense than a single weapon so large it could only be used to obliterate civilian populations.
Precisely. There were also intense concerns about the indiscriminate radioactive effects. But fundamentally, there was a profound strategic fear. They recognized that relying solely on destructive magnitude, the belief that security only comes from building a blast 1,000 times bigger than the last one, would trigger a self-reinforcing, unwinnable arms race.
They were asking, where does this end? If you lock the world into a cycle where the only answer to a new weapon is an even bigger weapon, you aren't building security. You're building a suicide pact.
And this fierce debate over the H-bomb exposed a much deeper friction in modern governance. What exactly is the role of the scientific expert once the weapon leaves the laboratory?
Because during this era, scientists were suddenly thrust into the spotlight. They weren't just researchers anymore. They were acting as high-level political advisors to the state.
It brings up the problem of the jurisdictional limits of expertise. When a scientist acts as an advisor, they have an absolute duty to warn of consequences. They must explain the physical mechanisms, project the technical timelines, and clearly outline uncertainties.
But, and this is a critical boundary, we need to explicitly correct the idea that scientific expertise grants exclusive moral authority.
Yes. A physicist is an expert on nuclear yield. They understand isotopes and thermal radiation. That does not inherently make them an expert on diplomacy, international law, economics, or public consent.
Knowing the precise mathematical modeling of a shockwave does not make a person an authority on whether a democratic society should accept the risk of generating that shockwave. Those are two entirely different categories of judgment, right?
Exactly. What scientific expertise can establish is the realm of physical fact and documented history. But ethical, legal, diplomatic, strategic, and democratic judgment must take over when deciding policy. Scientists should advise as experts rather than act as sovereign decision makers.
So what does this all mean for decision-making? It means experts should inform the democratic process, not act as a sovereign veto over it.
That is the ideal. But achieving that ideal requires immense translation. The lectures in the Open Mind point out that modern knowledge is incredibly fragmented. We live in an age of intense, narrow specialization.
Right.
Oppenheimer argued forcefully for interdisciplinary communication and for embedding science within the wider culture.
It's like trying to fly a passenger jet where the pilot only understands the destination and the engineer only understands the mechanics of the engine, but neither of them speaks the same language. If they can't communicate, the plane is going to crash.
That is a highly functional metaphor. If scientists retreat into a purely technical bubble speaking a mathematical language only they understand, and if the broader public lacks basic scientific literacy, democratic judgment fails completely.
You cannot have accountable governance if the citizens and the politicians don't actually understand the physical risks they are accepting, which means the scientific community needs to practice a lot of humility.
Humility is essential, especially when evidence remains incomplete. In an advisory context, humility means clearly acknowledging your error bars. It means admitting when the data is uncertain. During a political crisis, leaders are terrified and they demand binary yes or no answers. The most dangerous thing an expert can do is offer false, simplified confidence just to satisfy that political demand.
But let's look at what actually happens when experts practice that humility, but also offer advice the government doesn't want to hear. When they step out of the lab and say, we shouldn't build this hydrogen bomb right now, it's strategically dangerous. How does the political system react to that kind of dissent?
Historically, with devastating force. Which leads us to the 1954 security hearing.
Right, the hearing that stripped Oppenheimer of his security clearance. This is essentially the climax of this entire era's political paranoia.
It is a profound case study in the politics of trust. How do national security institutions evaluate loyalty under extreme ideological pressure? Now, to be historically rigorous, we must carefully separate the documented concerns from the political theater.
Okay, so what were the documented concerns?
There were documented bureaucratic concerns regarding Oppenheimer's past associations with political radicals in the 1930s. And there were instances on the record of a lack of candor, inconsistent statements he had made to military security officers years earlier.
So it wasn't just completely invented out of thin air. There was a paper trail of things that security officers genuinely sweat over when evaluating judgment.
Yes. However, the hearing itself was characterized by intense political hostility and staggering procedural unfairness. Prosecutors were allowed to listen to wiretaps of his conversations with his lawyers. Evidence was withheld. Fundamentally, the process was heavily driven by disagreement over weapons policy, specifically his opposition to the H-bomb and his push for more openness.
They couldn't win the strategic argument, so they attacked his character to remove him from the board.
Precisely. And this is where the historical arc finds a very modern resolution. It is a crucial detail that we must explain proportionately. In 2022, the United States Department of Energy officially vacated that 1954 Atomic Energy Commission decision.
Wow, so decades later they actually reversed it.
Yes. They explicitly recognized that the historical process was flawed, biased, and violated the Commission's own regulations. This raises an important question about governance today. How do security systems distinguish between genuine security threats and merely inconvenient dissent?
That is a massive institutional admission. But we have to be clear here. The 2022 Department of Energy reversal does not imply that every controversy surrounding him just vanished into thin air. And it certainly doesn't mean that all of his political and strategic judgments back in the 40s and 50s were perfectly correct.
It doesn't absolve the historical debates, no. But it powerfully highlights the extreme danger of using procedural manipulation to enforce ideological conformity. When a state punishes its top experts for providing evidence-based advice that happens to be politically inconvenient, it intentionally blinds itself.
It creates a massive chilling effect. If I'm a scientist on a government advisory board, and I see the most famous physicist in the country publicly ruined for dissenting, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. You end up with a room full of yes men, which is the exact opposite of what you need when dealing with existential technology.
And that leaves the state incredibly vulnerable to strategic miscalculation.
Which brings us to today. We could just leave all of this in the 1950s as some fascinating historical drama. The institutional architectures, the psychological models of deterrence, the physical weapon systems built back then, they are still actively governing our world right now. So let's provide a meaningful modern update through 2026. What is the nuclear danger right now?
The landscape has evolved, but the foundational risks remain. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute CIPRI's 2026 assessment, there is an estimated global inventory of 12,187 nuclear warheads.
12,187. That is, wow.
And these are distributed across 9 armed states, not just 2 superpowers anymore.
Over 12,000 warheads.
Right.
And it's not just the sheer number that's terrifying, is it? It's the technology surrounding them.
Numbers alone do not capture the full spectrum of the modern risk. Today, nuclear environment is vastly more complex. We are dealing with extensive nuclear modernization programs. States are making their weapons faster, more precise, and stealthier. Concurrently, we are witnessing the steady weakening of legacy arms control arrangements.
Treaties are falling apart.
Treaties that took decades to build are collapsing. And compounding all of this are the severe escalation and miscalculation risks. We still have high-alert forces missiles ready to launch in minutes.
And now we have cyber vulnerabilities deeply woven into those command and control systems. I mean, what happens if a warning radar is hacked?
Exactly. Furthermore, we face the deployment of dual-capable systems.
Let's translate that for a second. A dual-capable system means an adversary fires a missile, and you can see it on your radar, but you have absolutely no idea if it's carrying a conventional explosive or a nuclear warhead.
You have to assume the worst. And because these new delivery systems are incredibly fast, it severely compresses the decision-making time a leader has during a crisis. A leader might have less than 10 minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike based on incomplete, potentially compromised data.
It's the 1950s nightmare scenario, but operating at fiber optic speed. And this brings us to an incredible parallel. If we take a step back from nuclear weapons, we can apply this as a general technology test for the year 2026. Think about the massive leaps we are seeing right now in artificial intelligence.
The parallels are striking, particularly regarding the dual-use institutional dilemma.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about AI today. It is a dual-use technology just like atomic energy was. It can be used to model complex proteins and discover new life-saving medicines. But that exact same underlying algorithmic power can be weaponized for autonomous drone warfare or generating catastrophic cyber attacks.
It is the exact same tension.
And just like in the atomic age, we have government institutions trying to vigorously promote and invest in the technology to win a global race, while simultaneously trying to regulate it to prevent disaster.
Now, we must be intellectually careful with the analogy. Artificial intelligence and biotechnology do not look exactly like nuclear weapons physically. Nuclear weapons require massive, easily verifiable industrial footprints. You can spot a uranium enrichment plant from a satellite.
Right. But AI models spread via digital networks, open source repositories, and commercial markets. They are decentralized.
But the structural questions, the really hard governance questions that Oppenheimer and his peers wrestled with, they remain the same.
Who bears the ultimate risk of this new technology? What aspects of a digital algorithm can actually be verified by an international body? And crucially, how do our modern tech companies and government institutions handle internal dissent and technical uncertainty?
Bringing all these themes into a proportionate conclusion, what we learned from this deep dive is this. Science can reveal consequences and challenge false assumptions with hard empirical data, but science alone cannot control what it creates.
Because responsible control isn't a math problem. It requires legitimate institutions, rigorous verification, and real accountability. It needs international cooperation, open public reasoning where citizens actually understand the stakes, institutional restraint, and a mechanism for continuous correction. We have to be able to spot and fix our mistakes before they become fatal. This episode is an independent COSMORA HQ book overview and audio podcast. It is not an audiobook, narration, adaptation, abridgment, authorized edition, or substitute for lawful access to the original work. Subscribe to COSMORA HQ for more authentic, source-based science and intellectual podcasts. Share your perspectives in the comments, and share this episode with an intellectual friend who enjoys examining scientific discovery, power, and responsibility.
When science creates a power that cannot be forgotten, who should be responsible for controlling it?